I'll never forget the exact moment my world collapsed. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I was sitting on my kitchen floor, staring at my phone screen with tears streaming down my face. My checking account balance read $17.38. $17. I had worked 60-hour weeks for 3 months straight, followed every piece of budgeting advice I could find, and I still couldn't afford both gas and groceries that week. That's when the text came in from my dad, an article titled, "Why Millennials Can't Afford Houses, The Avocado Toast Problem." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall. Instead, I just sat there, sobbing on my cold kitchen tiles, wondering how a generation that was told we could do anything had ended up unable to afford basic survival. That night, sitting in the dark with my empty fridge humming behind me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out why we're all struggling, and what I discovered made me so angry I couldn't sleep for weeks. The financial advice industry has been lying to us. They've built a $3 billion empire on our desperation, convincing us that poverty is a personal choice while they profit from our shame. But I'm about to expose every dirty trick they've used to keep us broke and desperate. By the time you finish watching this, you'll understand why your budgeting apps have failed you, why you can't save money no matter how hard you try, and why an entire generation has been gaslit into believing they're financially irresponsible. My breaking point came after 3 months of following a popular budgeting app religiously. I canceled Netflix, which hurt because it was my only entertainment after 14-hour workdays. I stopped buying coffee, even though that $5 latte was the only thing that got me through my morning commute. I meal prepped every Sunday, spending hours chopping vegetables and portioning out sad-looking containers of rice and chicken. I switched to generic everything, from shampoo to toilet paper, because the app told me every dollar mattered. After 3 months of living like I was in financial boot camp, denying myself every small pleasure that made life bearable, I had saved exactly $84. $84. I remember staring at that number and feeling so defeated I couldn't even cry anymore. Meanwhile, my rent had gone up by $200 because my landlord decided the building needed improvements that consisted of painting the hallway. My car insurance increased by $40 for no reason anyone could explain. And my student loan payment somehow stayed exactly the same despite me making payments for 2 years, watching the balance barely budge. That's when I realized I wasn't bad with money. The math was rigged against me. I was playing a game where the rules had been changed, but nobody told me. I was following advice designed for an economy that died before I even graduated college. And somewhere, people were getting rich off my failure. I spent the next 4 months diving deep into economic data, staying up until 3 a.m. reading Federal Reserve reports, calling economists, analyzing wage stagnation studies. What I found made me want to burn down the entire financial advice industry. There's a deliberate campaign to convince our generation that we're the problem, when really, we're living through the largest wealth transfer in human history, and it's going in the wrong direction. Let me tell you about Sarah, my friend who works 3 jobs and still can't afford a 1-bedroom apartment. Sarah follows every money-saving tip she finds online. She uses coupons, shops sales, drives 20 minutes out of her way to save $3 on groceries. But here's what her budgeting app doesn't tell her. Rent for a 1-bedroom apartment has increased by 89% since 2000, while wages have only gone up 24%. Sarah isn't financially irresponsible. She's trying to survive in an economy designed to extract wealth from people like her. I talked to Dr. Sarah Chen, an economist at Berkeley who studies millennial finances, and what she told me broke my heart. A minimum wage worker in 1968 had more purchasing power than college graduates today. Think about that. Your grandparents working part-time at a grocery store could afford more than you can with your degree and your 40-hour-a-week job. A part-time minimum wage job in 1968 could pay for an entire year of college tuition. Today, that same job wouldn't cover the cost of textbooks for one semester. But instead of acknowledging this economic collapse, the financial advice industry tells us to make coffee at home. They tell us our financial struggles are caused by a $7 breakfast we haven't bought in months. While we're sitting in our empty apartments, calculating whether we can afford both rent and food, CEOs are making more in a single day than we'll make in an entire year. Executive compensation has increased by 1,322% since 1978. But sure, let's talk about how your morning latte is destroying your future. I remember the first time I used a budgeting app. It felt like hope. Finally, someone was going to help me figure out where my money was going. I spent hours categorizing every transaction, feeling guilty about that emergency Uber ride when my car broke down, ashamed of the takeout I ordered after working a 14-hour day because I was too exhausted to cook. The app made me feel like a failure for spending money on basic human needs. But here's what that app didn't tell me. The traditional budgeting rules were created in the 1990s when rent was 25% of median income. Today, rent is 37% of median income, and that's before utilities, before insurance, before the 15 different subscription services that used to be free or one-time purchases. The math behind every budgeting rule you've ever heard is based on an economy that no longer exists. I started tracking costs our parents never had to deal with. My phone plan costs more than my dad's first car payment. My health insurance deductible is higher than my mom's entire yearly medical expenses used to be. I pay monthly subscriptions for software that my parents bought once and owned forever. Basic existence now requires a subscription fee. But the financial advice industry tells us to budget for these things like they're optional luxuries. The gig economy was supposed to give us freedom, but it's made budgeting impossible. 40% of millennials work gig jobs with unpredictable income. How do you budget when you don't know if you'll make $400 or $1,400 this month? The budgeting apps were designed for people with steady salaries, not for people driving for Uber between freelance writing projects and weekend retail shifts. But here's where the story gets truly sick. The same financial institutions that caused the 2008 recession, the same banks that got bailed out with our taxpayer money while we inherited a destroyed economy, are now selling us apps and courses on how to manage money better. They crashed the economy, we got stuck with the consequences, and now they're profiting from teaching us how to survive in the wreckage they created. Chase Bank offers credit cards with 24% interest rates, then sells courses on debt management. They're literally profiting from both sides of the problem. They create the debt trap, then charge us to learn how to escape it. It's like an arsonist selling fire insurance. The student loan crisis has destroyed budgeting for our entire generation. I carry $38,000 in student debt, and my monthly payment would have covered my dad's entire rent when he was my age. But instead of acknowledging that we're paying 10 times more for the same education our parents got, financial advisors tell us to cut back on entertainment. Entertainment! I haven't been to a movie in 8 months, and they think that's the problem? My friend Marcus showed me his expense tracking last year, and I actually started crying. He spent more on rent than his dad spent on mortgage, car payment, and utilities combined. More on health insurance than his mom spent on groceries. More on student loans than his parents spent on their first house down payment. But when he asked his family for financial advice, they told him to stop eating out so much. Marcus was living on ramen and hope, eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day, and they thought restaurant meals were his problem. The financial advice industry has convinced us that being broke is a moral failing. They've turned poverty into a personal responsibility problem when wages haven't kept up with basic living costs for decades. Every budgeting app, every financial guru, every money management course assumes you have enough money to budget in the first place. But what if you don't? What if your entire paycheck goes to rent, student loans, and basic survival? They use our desperation to sell us more products. Can't afford a house? Here's a high-interest savings account that might get you there in 20 years if housing prices magically stop increasing. Can't pay off student loans? Here's a refinancing option that extends your payments and costs more overall, but hey, lower monthly payments. Can't afford retirement? Here's a financial advisor who will charge you to manage money you don't have. The morning I finally deleted every budgeting app from my phone, I cried again. But this time, they were tears of relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't being reminded every day that I was failing at something that was impossible to succeed at. I wasn't being told that my poverty was my fault. I stopped blaming myself for an economy designed to keep people like us struggling. That's when I started focusing on what actually mattered. Instead of optimizing my spending on an income that barely covered survival, I started working on increasing my income. Instead of feeling guilty about buying lunch, I started learning about wage stagnation and economic inequality. Instead of tracking every penny like it was my fault I was broke, I started understanding that my financial struggles were the predictable result of policies designed to benefit people who already had money. The financial advice industry is worth $3 billion, and almost none of that money comes from people who actually achieved financial independence. It comes from people like us, desperate and ashamed, buying course after course, app after app, hoping the next one will finally fix problems they refuse to acknowledge are systematic. We're not customers trying to solve a problem. We're products being sold solutions to crises they helped create. Your financial struggles aren't personal failures. They're not character flaws or moral shortcomings. They're the intended outcome of an economy designed to extract wealth from workers and transfer it to people who already own assets. The sooner we understand this, the sooner we can stop wasting our energy on budgeting hacks and start demanding changes that actually address why working full-time doesn't guarantee financial security anymore. I know this hurts to hear. I know it's easier to believe that if you just try harder, track better, budget smarter, you'll finally make it work. But I need you to understand that millions of us are facing the same impossible math. We're not isolated failures. We're When we realize that our struggles are shared, we stop feeling powerless and start feeling dangerous to their profits. That's why they work so hard to convince us it's our fault. The moment we recognize their system is broken, we become a threat to their business model. The financial advice industry wants you scrolling through budgeting apps at 3 a.m., convinced you're one spreadsheet away from solving poverty. They want you isolated, ashamed, and desperately buying their next course. But what if, instead of downloading another app, you joined other people fighting for living wages? What if, instead of cutting your already bare-bones budget, you supported politicians who want to make housing affordable? What if, instead of feeling guilty about student loans, you demanded the free public education that previous generations enjoyed? Every time you refuse to feel ashamed about being broke in a broken system, you're fighting back. Every time you share this truth with someone who needs to hear it, you're building something they can't monetize or control. This isn't just about money, it's about reclaiming our right to exist without constantly justifying our survival. The revolution won't be budgeted. It will be built by people who are done being told that poverty is a personal choice. So turn off those notifications that make you feel guilty for buying coffee. Delete those apps that shame you for spending money on basic needs. Channel that energy into something that actually threatens the people who want to keep us desperate and divided. They've been profiting from our desperation for too long. It's time we made them desperate for our votes, our labor, and our attention. The real equation we need to balance isn't our monthly expenses. It's the power between people who work and people who own. And that's math we can actually solve. You are not a failure for struggling financially in an economy designed to make financial security impossible. You are not irresponsible for being unable to save money when basic living costs consume your entire paycheck. You are a human being trying to survive in a system that has forgotten that working people deserve to live with dignity. I'm done tracking my coffee purchases while my rent takes 60% of my income. I'm done feeling guilty about wanting a life that's more than just survival. I'm done being told that my generation's financial struggles are our fault when we're living through the worst economic conditions in decades. It's time to delete those apps and start building a world where budgeting advice becomes obsolete, because everyone who works can afford to live. The comment section is going to be intense, but I don't care. Someone out there needs to hear this. Someone is sitting at their kitchen table right now, crying over their budget app, wondering why they can't make the math work. And they need to know they're not alone, they're not a failure, and it's not their fault. Let me know what industry you want me to expose next, because I'm just getting started. Remember, you're not broke because you're irresponsible. You're broke because the system is working exactly as designed. Let's break it.